Welcome to the Moon Baby Magic Podcast, a space to honor women's rites of passage stories. From menarche to menopause, the initiations of womanhood all live within our wombs. We are here to reclaim the sacredness of all of them. I'm your host, Natalie Elliott, birth keeper and women's coach specializing in womb wellness and hormonal healing. Ready for slow and sacred storytelling? Let's dive in. Hey, women. Thank you so much for being here on the Moon Baby Magic podcast. My intention in everything I do at Moon Baby Magic is to support women in coming home to the sacredness and power that lives within their very bodies. So if you'd like to go deeper, a few resources for you. You can follow me on Instagram. I love to connect with women there. You can get the Womb Cycle Spotify playlists, your period prep guide, book an in-depth one-on-one virtual session, or shop herbal goodies. All of these are always included in the show notes of every episode, and I hope that they support you. Thank you. Let's get on to the show. Hello, wonderful women. Once again, welcome back to the Moon Baby Magic podcast. And once again, thank you so much for being here. I have really been enjoying reading for those of you who have written reviews or left comments if you're on Spotify for the podcast. It just really means so much to me to hear how the podcast is really touching each of your hearts. And that is the really deep heart-based intention of this podcast, is to provide a sanctuary for women's stories, and then for those stories to then be medicine for you, the listeners. So thank you for receiving them. It's such an honor to have you here in this space with me. And before I go any further, if you're listening to this, if you just happen to be listening to this in like the first 6 hours that the podcast comes out before 12 p.m. Eastern on today, November 13th, 2024, then scroll down to the show notes and go ahead and click on the link to join the Cyclical Living Circle today. It is, this is my new space. This is my new membership space, and it's kicking off today with a call at 12 p.m. Eastern and followed by a free week in the membership. Now, if you're listening and it's past this time, whatever, for whatever reason, you're listening later, it's probably pretty normal. It's fine. You can still get your free week trial. So yeah, you can still click that link, get your free week. I recommend doing the free week sometime around where the date of the 13th of any month that you're doing the trial in will be, because then you'll get to attend our flagship call, which is the Cyclical Living Circle, a monthly women's circle where I do a little bit of teaching around some topic, answer questions, and honestly, the most special part, that women get to share their experiences, share their hearts, be witnessed and seen and heard in their unique experiences. And it's just so beautiful and touches me every time. So yeah, you can hit that link to join if you want to stay in the membership. It's $13 a month, pretty good exchange, I think, for what you're getting. You're getting access to me to answer questions that are just like too in-depth for me to answer on Instagram. You're getting this monthly circle. You're getting a forum with other women. And there's also going to be other fun little additions, like I'm scheduling book club, Womb Wisdom or Wild Woman Book Club, not sure what it'll be called. But we'll read books together and meet and talk about them, which I'm so excited about going into the winter. Feels like just perfect. And there will also be like a nourishing recipe and meal ideas channel and so much more. So yeah, I really just want to throw in so much to this space. It's really nourishing for me to have this ongoing space where I can just fully devote myself to and then receive the exchange of your $13 a month. That feels really good. And I really hope to connect more deeply with all of you there. So again, link in the show notes. And yeah, today on the podcast, we have Tatiana. Tatiana is the author of Path to Puberty, the ultimate resource guide to moms of daughters. Now, this book is all about how to prepare yourself, your daughter, how to understand and honor this rite of passage that girls go through. And Tatiana is both deeply spiritual and reverent, as well as funny and relatable. So I think this is a really wonderful resource for, yeah, all mothers or anyone who wants to become a mother. And if you want to get the book, you can also find the link for the book in the show notes. And if you use this link, this is my affiliate link to the Path to Puberty book. And so you would be supporting both me and Tatiana with that link. And we both greatly appreciate it. And the next generation of girls greatly appreciates us learning to embody this wisdom for ourselves. And if you're here, I know that's important to you too. So, this is a really rich and dynamic episode full of Tatiana's experiences in the counterculture, her initiations into the womb mysteries, death, and through that birth, as well as her own birth stories. And Tatiana seriously has the best stories. You'll also hear some of the magical moments Tatiana has witnessed within her own daughter as she has been initiated into womanhood in a really intact and reverent way. This episode will make you both laugh and cry, which I think is the sign of any good story, really. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right. Hey, Tatiana, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Natalie. Thanks for having me.
I'm happy you're here. So, as I told you before we started recording, the first question I always ask women right when we get going is to share what phase of your cycle and what phase of life you're in. So, I'd love to hear that from you.
Well, right now I'm at the end of my follicular phase of my cycle, entering ovulation.
Mm, me
So
too.
it's a great time for me to be on a podcast talking. Um, and in my life right now, I'm like still in mothering, but definitely entering more into that like MAGA
Mm,
sorceress kind of stage.
mm.
Um, yeah, who I'm really enjoying getting to know her. Like yeah, she's potent.
Yeah, I'm like,
She doesn't give any fucks. Like it's really great.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I know that archetype just from my cycle, but I often talk to my friends, and I'm 28 and I haven't had children, so I'm in my maiden years. And I just continue to get excited for that phase of life. And I'm really grateful for that I have like women in my life like you and like my teachers in Blood Mystery School, Nancy and Kristen, and just other women who are really embodied in the womb mysteries and like talk about that phase of life with reverence, not, disgust or fear or whatnot, because I continue to be like excited to meet her.
Well, I think that's like the ultimate joke, right? Like we've been tricked to believe that like everything ends after 40. And I'm like,
Mm.
dude, post 40 is fucking awesome. It's so cool. I
Yeah.
mean, it's different, right? And because there isn't a lot of modeling and a lot of talking about what that stage is, it can hit, there are definitely some ways where you're like, whoa, wait, what? Like everything is different in so many ways. My body's changing, the way that the world responds to me is changing. The way I move through the world is changing, but it's like pretty awesome. I think it's very liberating stage of life, personally.
Mm, that's amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think in order for it to be liberating, like you have to have a level of being able to meet yourself and meet, your edges and see who it is that you want to be and have the courage to become that person, which isn't always easy. And I've been talking about this so much online lately, as I feel like I'm in a stage of that too, being in my Saturn return and just like so many growth edges to meet. And I feel like, I think your Saturn does actually return again, like in your 50s,
It
but
does. The midlife crisis.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like all of these moments in our life where we're like, oh wow, who am I? And who do I not want to be? And who do I want to be?
And can I love myself exactly as I am right now? Even knowing who I can be, you know, all of
Yeah.
that. I think that's really being willing to love yourself. Like that's a really
Yeah.
courageous act.
Oh,
Even when you fuck up.
yeah. Isn't that the biggest lesson in all of it? I feel like in any ceremony or realization I have had, it's like the lesson isn't what I think the lesson is. The lesson is actually to love myself with the lesson.
Yeah.
Uh, well, I would love to travel back in time with you a little bit. And, as a fellow woman of the womb, I know that you, yeah, have like done a lot of this work around your blood mysteries. And I'm curious, like, what you remember about your menarche, if you remember anything about it.
Yeah. I mean, I just wrote a whole book about menarche and, supporting my oldest daughter through it. And so I've had a lot of opportunity over the last year and change of the book writing, and then just also
Yeah.
like being with her through it to reflect on that journey for myself. And it's not like I have like the most vivid memory I have is coming out of the bathroom after discovering that there was blood. I don't even remember like being in the bathroom and seeing the blood. Like that's not a clear image that I have in my memory bank, but I remember going into, like, I remember it so clearly in the hallway, and the stairwell was right there, and knowing that something really special had just happened to me, and like being in this, like, I mean, it's a space that I operate in a lot, especially when, I'm in session with people or in ceremonial space where it's like, everything's kind of like twinkly and you're in like the mist, like the like sacred misty like orb thing that happens. And I was like in that space and just like something really potent has just occurred. But then also feeling like I didn't have anyone in my life. Oh my God, it makes me want to cry for my poor little 12-year-old self. Like I didn't have anyone in my life who was going to meet me in that space.
Mm.
So I knew that something really potent and powerful and special had just happened, and I didn't know anyone who was going to join me in that like reverence for what had occurred.
Mm. Yeah, I hear you and I feel you. It's so interesting because I think, yeah, and like to just really give some space for like hugging that inner little girl, I think
Yeah.
that's a really important thing in this process of remembering these rites of passage. And also just that I think that this is such a common story that like a lot of the women I interview, they have some sense, of course we do. We have some sense that like this is special, this is sacred. But for the most part, the people in our lives, our mothers or whatever women figures are in our lives at the time, they haven't had the like reclaiming of their rites of passage. They've had quite the opposite, they've had the like sort of brainwashing that these are not sacred. And so then that childlike wonder and awe and curiosity and connection to the magic is gets lost in that way until we consciously choose to reclaim it, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, like, to her credit, my mom like knew about things. My mom was a hippie, my mom
Love that.
sent she sent me to, it was actually before I started my first bleed, but she sent me to this wilderness camp where it was like an all girls camp, and we, built a moon lodge, and we were living out in the forest for weeks,
Wow.
and it culminated in a overnight, like a wilderness solo, 24-hour solo. So like I went through like some kind of rite of passage thing
Mhm.
because my parents sent me to this camp.
Wow.
But it was also before I bled, and it like so but it meant that like I got to hear all these stories of women bleeding. Like it wasn't like I was completely alone and cut off from it. Like some people I know who grow up in, more of like the Western world, like normal culture, and know nothing about it, but still have that sense. Like I did have these kind of different influences in my life, but my mom was not embodied in it. It was just kind of like
Mhm.
an outsourcing to other
Mhm.
people to like try to help me with stuff that like she knew was there, but was completely
Right.
unable to access in herself, which was what
Right.
I need. I needed a mom who was holding it, who
Yeah.
was carrying it, and she was not. And I mean, I don't fault her for that,
Yeah.
but that's just how it was. And then to get to be able to like walk with my own daughter through that and have it was so cool, Natalie, when she
Mm.
got her first blood. Of course, I was like in the middle of writing the book, and I wasn't at home when it happened. Not
Oh,
only was I not at home, I was at a performance. And so I had silenced my cell phone and she was home alone and was trying to get in touch with me and could not get through. So like my mom guilt was off the charts, like huge. But she did manage to contact her grandmother. Her grandmother came and was with her, not my mom, my husband's mom.
mhm.
And you know, I was like, as soon as I got out of the show, like I got the message and I was like, oh my God, like and so I like rushed to the store on the way home to like it was like the fastest in and out of Whole Foods I've ever had in my life. I was like, I'm getting the flourless chocolate cake and berries and out. Like I knew exactly what I was doing. And and we got home and it was so sweet because it was me, my husband was out of town. So it was me, my youngest daughter, my mother and my mother-in-law and my daughter who had just
Oh,
started her moon time. And I came home and it was like that feeling of like she knew that something really amazing had just happened. She had walked through something that was like kind of scary, but she knew where all her stuff was. She had been prepared. We had talked about it at length. I had like given her her period kit like 8 months before this happened, you know, like she was ready. And there was this like self-confidence and self-assuredness and like I've stepped through a magic portal thing that she was wearing that she had never had on before. And it was so awesome to see
wow.
and to like I'm getting to see this generational healing through my oldest daughter. And it is so cool. It is so fun to like get to be a part of and to also witness in her.
Hmm. It's so amazing and it's so inspiring. I mean, I can imagine the mom guilt was intense, but it's also like you prepared her. Yeah. It's also like you prepared her for so long for that moment. Like I can imagine that, and even not even preparation, right? In the sense of like you actually teaching her stuff, but just also in the way that you live your life and the way that you're embodied, like you said that you really had needed from your mom. Um, and that's like why she was able to be confident in it. And yeah, I know that's like also why you wrote your book. And I'm thinking too about just like seeing your daughter at the Matriarch Rising Festival and like seeing, you leading ceremony and song, and then like also seeing her like be in that space and like passing out, tobacco offerings, or I forget what exactly we were offering to the fire, but just like that's what girls need, like their mothers to model it for them. And yeah, I guess I'm also curious if you think I had someone on my podcast, Kate. She was like the first episode, and she had a mother who just wasn't really present for her. She had a nanny who like kind of raised her, and um, Kate shared about how her mother like resourced her to other people, kind of like what you were saying your mother did. And so Kate's mother even like brought her to ayahuasca when she was 18 or something really young because she knew she couldn't offer initiation to her in the way that she wanted to. So yeah, I'm curious what you think about that. Like, do you think all girls need their mothers to model it for them, or is outsourcing like possible?
I mean, I can't speak to how that landed for Kate or like what that's done for her.
Yeah,
Um, my guess is that like good on her mom that at least she knew she couldn't give her daughter what she wanted to give her, and so she did it in the way that she felt was accessible to her. And that's really the best we can do.
mhm.
You know, like we can't always be everything.
Yeah,
And that's a huge like mom thing. It's like I'm supposed to do it all. Um, and I mean I think the ultimate is to have both.
yeah,
I think that we again, why I wrote the book because and I wrote the book for moms in particular, not for the girls, because I want the moms to be able to go through that journey so that they can be embodied for their daughters. Because while all of those things might have been really, really wonderful for her, I wonder if also having her mom embodied on that journey with her might not have made all the difference in the world.
right.
Because, at the end of the day, like it's not what's external,
Mhm.
It's what's internal, and that we learn by
Yeah.
what we see.
Yeah. So what was the process of, leading your daughter through this? Like, I mean, I'm sure you were just embodying it as she was even like a little girl, but
Yeah,
yeah,
so
like,
when she was born, I totally thought I was pregnant with a boy. Um, and I heard this voice, like serious, it was like the booming voice from above. She was born. I was like, it's a girl. Her birth was totally traumatic
Mm,
and not what I had expected at all. I was studying to be a home birth midwife at the time, and I ended up in the hospital with an induction. It
ugh,
was awful. It was awful, 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 awful. Abandoned by my midwives. It was so, so bad.
I'm sorry.
And and she is born. I have this like slippery, warm, wet human on my abdomen. Somehow, I don't know if someone says, or it's like it's a girl, and I hear this voice that's like, now the real work begins.
Mm,
Because I had already been, on my like women's empowerment journey. I had been like painting myself in my blood and doing my rituals and running the circles and like, doing all that stuff.
yep.
And then I was like, oh shit, now I have a girl who's going to be watching everything I do.
Mhm.
So it was like, you think you're all empowered, lady? Like,
Wow.
listen, listen, listen. She's going to show you. And she's been my best teacher
Wow.
through all of it.
Yeah.
Because even to the point when she was a baby and she was just starting to talk, like I remember this one moment I was like doing something in the mirror and having some like shitty thought. I don't even remember what it was. And then she like straight up said or did whatever it was I was thinking.
Mm,
Like, what, my thoughts aren't even my own anymore? Like I can't even I can't even be a dick in my own head. Like I have to get to that level.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like deep internal alignment that's necessary in order to raise a daughter, it seems like, because they see everything. I mean, I know for myself, like I have had to work through so many body image issues just from seeing my own mother like criticize her body constantly, and not want
Totally.
any photos of her anywhere. And it's like it doesn't, and I do remember my mom like telling me I was beautiful and all that stuff, but it's like what I was seeing was like I'm not supposed to think that of myself.
100%. My mom, every time, and she still does this, every time she looks in the mirror, it's like, oh, I look like a
Yeah.
disaster. Like, that's like her, that's her running narrative. Like, look at this horrible, ugly face that I'm looking at. And also, same thing. Like, I don't want to look at myself in pictures.
Hmm.
And this is another, I actually just like sent out an email about this because I was so thrilled. This happened yesterday. My daughter, we're sitting out here on the deck on this very same couch. And I look over, she's wearing shorts and she has something written on her thigh. And I was like, oh fuck. Like I guess we're doing this now. Um, because when I was her age, if I was writing stuff on my body, it was usually horrible things.
Mm,
Or I was cutting into my own skin.
yeah.
And I knew a lot of girls who were cutting into their own skin. And I look over to look closer to see what she had written on her thigh. And she had written, I love myself. Love
Oh.
Sana. And then on her inner thigh, where she like on top of her little stretch marks that she has, I'm amazing. And I was like, holy shit, I just won parenting.
Wow.
Like I just like that's like that like I not that it's like me that did it,
Yeah.
but like that's the generational healing right there.
Yeah.
I could die tomorrow and I know she'll be okay because she could write, I love myself on her own body. Like that's like what she's doing in her private thoughts.
Oh man. If you're not watching the video, I'm sobbing over here. It's just It's so amazing to hear.
Yeah.
And like that's the sort of internal dialogue that gets created when that's your external environment, you know?
And that's the power of this work.
Yeah.
That's the power of this work that we do. That's the power of the work that you're doing in the world.
Well, thank you.
That's what gets to be the result.
Yeah.
It matters. It matters so much.
Yeah.
How we talk about ourselves in front of our children matters.
Yeah.
They are listening.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm so curious now too. Like, this is probably going to be a long answer for this question, but I would love to just get into your process of how you went from being a young girl with cuts on her body,
Mm.
which, oh my goodness, was part of my experience and so many of women I love and experience as well. Um, to being, the one with the blood on your face and holding women's circles. Like, yeah, can you bridge that gap for me a little bit?
I'm trying to bridge it for myself here.
Yeah.
If I think back on that journey, I mean, it was, I think, like most people, I didn't come to it overnight. It was a gradual process, but it started with my own womb healing
Hmm.
because I was diagnosed with PCOS really young and I was put on birth control.
Okay. How old were
Before
you?
I was like 15. I wasn't even sexually
Wow.
active. And so
Oh
I
my
and I
God.
and I'm pretty sure that the PCOS was because of all these fucking antidepressants that I was put on, and because I was eating too much sugar and not getting enough exercise, and I didn't have like my soul and like that soul meeting, that soul need that I had, that moment where it was like I need someone who can meet me in this. Like I had that one camp experience, great, but none of those people were in my life
Right.
regularly. Like that was
Yeah.
one chunk of one summer. That wasn't something I had regular access to other than like going out and doing seances in the woods with my friends. Like that was like,
Amazing.
which I did. I started reading Tarot at 11, like I was drawn to it, but but like, yeah, I wasn't met. And I was eating so much sugar and I had this horrible, eating disorder. And like, instead it's like, just take pills. Like that's not what I needed. That's not
Yeah.
what I needed. And it caused all these other metabolic problems for me. And so then I was on birth control. And then that same doctor who had put me on all of these pharmaceuticals and who, um, prescribed that birth control. I came back one summer from college and it was after my first year of college. And he was like, there's this new birth control that you can take so that you won't bleed at all. And I was like, that doesn't sound like a good thing. Um, like even at that age, I was like, there was something about that that didn't seem quite right. And
Yeah.
he was like, no, the whole narrative, like women have more periods than they need to, blah, blah, blah. Right. Because like we used to have way more babies and now we're not having that many more
Oh
babies. And
my
so we're
God.
not supposed to really bleed as much as we do. And so,
So
um,
the way to fix that is to put an artificial substance into your body
is
because that's healthy.
right. Because that's normal,
Yeah.
right? So, but it is, that's what's become normal.
Yeah.
So he gave me, but like I was so conditioned to outsource my agency to authority at that point, and I was already so in used to him giving me new drugs, um, that I took it and I went off to college. And one day it was like a couple months in, I just started bleeding, like hemorrhage bleeding.
Well,
For 9 straight days, I was like flooding. I was in so much pain. I had to have my roommates help me go to the bathroom. Um, I couldn't like get off the couch. It was horrible. Um, couldn't go to class. It was a mess. So I decided to stop taking the pill. I was like, this is not working for my
yeah.
body. Clearly, my body is revolting, and I am going to listen to her. And so I stopped taking that medication. And that was really like, that was the first step in the bridge. And then I started to learn about, there was like this one little corner of campus. I went to college in Canada at York
Mm.
University in Toronto, and there was this like one there's like a bunch of different restaurants and bars on campus. It was kind of like its own little enclosed universe.
Mm.
And there was one little like hippie vegan restaurant in like the far corners of the campus. And I started to meet people who were into organic farming and composting, and someone who was actually studying to be a midwife, which at the time I was like, that is so weird. You just want to look at women's vaginas. Like did not understand. Like I thought it was, I had so many judgments about it. Um,
That must be funny to look
which
back
is
on.
hilarious to think about now, where I'm like, birth is the most sacred thing, and it's an
Yeah.
honor to be invited to a woman's birth. But um, yeah. So, but like, so that was like my entry point, you
Yeah.
know, and I was like smoking a lot of pot and doing mushrooms, and like, and the mushrooms actually really helped me too. I think like rewire my consciousness into like the frequency of love,
Yeah.
and that unified field. And that there's so much more than just our little human selves. And
Mm.
you know, I was like having my crazy hippie wild adventures, and you know, and then I left school. I dropped out of school and I moved to Arizona and met more hippies in Arizona and went, you know, hitchhiking. And you know, like I had like I did the young adventure thing that you're supposed to do. And
Yeah, that's amazing. I think it's so
um
important.
it's so important.
Yeah.
I'm like, I've definitely had my moments over the years where I'm like, oh, I wish I had just like finished school and gotten a job like a normal person. But then I'm like, no, I have the best
No.
stories.
Yeah.
And those people don't have any stories. I have the best stories. Um, yeah. And so like I think it was really through engaging with the counterculture in a very deep way and being willing to just question all the narratives that I had been fed. Um, and really start to make decisions for myself. Like dropping out of school was the first decision I had ever made for me.
Mm.
And then
And
I
how old
met,
were you then?
I was 19.
Yeah, that's cool. I think I went to college. I did the college thing. I was always a little bit counterculture too, but I did do college. And I just love hearing women's stories when they were like, I'm going to do something different. Because for me, it came much later. I was like 22 or 23 working my corporate job for like the first year after college. And then I was like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, well, and counterculture nowadays is so much easier to find than it
Yeah,
was back then. Like
I
back
bet.
then, you had to really like seek it out. You had to really be like, I'm rejecting that. You couldn't just go online and meet people. There was no online. There it was
Mhm.
like you had to be in the real world and
Yeah,
find these people in real life. Like it wasn't, you couldn't just like Google a thing and find all sorts of people, a thread about it. And like, you know, it was not
exactly.
easy. It was
Yeah.
not easy. It was but it was, I think on a certain level, more real
Mm,
because you had to really want it. You had to really seek it out. You had to it wasn't easy. And so you had to really make choices that were different.
yeah.
It took a little more courage.
Yeah, that's a great word for it, courage. And I think that in the maiden phase of life, like those like like early 20s, late teens, like that kind of phase of life, it's like so characterized by courage. And just yeah, like I and a little bit of being naive too, which I think is actually yeah. Which I was actually listening to a podcast yesterday about like neuroscience and how like the certain part of our brain that it doesn't develop until we're 25. And that part of the brain, it's like everything in our brain. So we like understand consequences, but the part of us that like puts consequences into context of like, I shouldn't do that doesn't develop until 25.
Completely.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so me in Italy at 20, hitchhiking on the back of a Vespa. Like,
Totally. And now you're like, are you
I would
nuts?
never
I would
do
never
that.
do that. But like, yeah, complete. I mean, I met this guy who was not okay in his mind. And we ended up going hitchhiking from Tucson. I was living in Tucson. It was like this dude never wore shoes. He like walked around in a cape all day.
No.
He this was anyway, I'm not going to go into that story. But like so we're like hitchhike out to California. We had some notion because I'm living in Arizona now and I forget there's seasons that like we could hitchhike to the redwoods in January and live off the land. Like I don't like
God.
totally like talk about not putting consequence into
Yeah.
context. Like what? Are you nuts? Um and so we ended up, like I ended up, but that's how I met my first teacher who
Mm.
also was not a healthy person.
Oh.
He was a Vietnam vet who had a drinking problem, who was a Cherokee medicine man, who I ended up becoming his mistress for a while.
Mm.
And I stayed with him for almost a year through the course. I learned all these medicinal plants and stuff. It was a very toxic relationship. And then getting out of that, going to the big island of Hawaii, where my
Mm.
mom had a friend who ran a Dharma retreat center down there. And I like, that was the first time, that was where I really got introduced to the women's mysteries, like really
Mm.
fully was
Yeah.
on the big island through Pele, through like I was so broken when I showed up there that I was
Mm.
willing to do anything, to look at anything in myself, to own anything I needed to not feel the way that I was feeling when I showed up there because
Mm.
being with that man was such a head trip and like a total system fuck over.
Yeah.
At that very young age, I was like 21 or something when I met him and went through all of that. Um, and so to then arrive at Rashani's on the Big Island and like detangle that and like let the let the fire, let Pele heal me. Um, and I remember I was thinking about it in preparation for this call, like that was the first time that I ever painted myself in my blood. And
Ah.
I created a ritual for myself because I had been very promiscuous up until that point. I mean, not as promiscuous as some people I've met, but like, I had slept with like 23 men or something at that state at that point in my life.
Yeah.
And um in a span of like 5 years, maybe four, maybe, not a long time. And I did this whole, I like created this ritual for myself where I wrote down everybody's name and I made myself a fire and I painted myself in my blood. I was bleeding. I'm trying to remember the like actual steps I took because I just did what came to me. Wrote down their names, made this fire, which that in and of itself had a lot of lessons in it because fire teaches us so much about who we
Mhm.
are and how we show up in the world and like
Mm.
how hard it was to light the fire taught me so much about like my preparedness and how I go into things and how, like just there's like so much in fire and what it
Yeah.
can teach. But then burning these men's names and painting myself in my own blood and really reclaiming my own womb sovereignty that like my womb was not on lease to anyone who did not deserve to enter anymore, and really, really marking that for myself. Like, this is
Wow.
not something that I am just going to give to anybody anymore. I do not need power this way. Because
Mm.
for me, that's absolutely what it was. As a young woman, I was like seeking power. And I had some distorted notion that the more men I could sleep with, then like the more powerful I was somehow.
Mm.
Because we do like it when we're feeling juicy, like we do exude something. I had this
Yeah.
experience today, right? Like I rode my bike into town and I knew I was like, I am about to ovulate. I am feeling really magnetic right now.
Yeah.
And I watched like all the dudes' heads turn to look at me and then like pretend not to look at me. And I was like, I know what you can do with that.
Yeah.
I know what you can do with that. And I do think that part of our responsibility as women is to know what we can do with that and be responsible with it
Mm.
and
Mhm.
not take advantage of these men. Because that, I mean, that's like we live in this whole like we're the victim and like we're
Mm.
getting taken advantage of, and not to say like yeah, that does happen. But
Mhm.
also like, you know what you're exuding.
Yeah.
You're like, we ooze it
Yeah.
when we're in that space. And let's not pretend that we don't know that,
Mm.
because we do.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such an important thing to be. I think there's an aspect of really coming into womanhood that is like reclaiming that power and knowing that power and like really like harnessing it, because a lot of us come from like more of a broken place where we just don't even see it. But you're right. There comes this like oftentimes second initiation with the power of like, and how do I wield my power responsibly? And I feel like, it does tend to come a little bit later. I know for me, it's been like, yeah, like my early 20s, like I was totally wielding that power all over the place. Like, look at me, I know I'm hot. And now I'm coming to this place where it's like, oh, okay, that's not being in right relationship with my eros, like the sexual
Mhm.
creative force. Like that can actually be channeled into anything.
Yeah. And it's also disrespectful to the men too.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to call that out.
Yeah.
Like they're people and they have feelings and they like
Yeah.
they're not just automatons who are like taught to rape. Like they're human,
Yes.
and we're dealing with other humans and hearts and lives. And like we have to yeah, because I think we objectify men just as much as they objectify us.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing, like coming into collective awareness lately too, is like remembering that men are people too. And like just yeah, I think it really has rubbed me the wrong way when there's just this like all men are the worst conversation, because
Oh yeah.
of course they're humans. And I think that, yeah, there's just this like remembrance, which is so funny to say, like coming online, that men and women together are sacred and that we need both and that we are more powerful together.
Yeah. And that if we don't give them something to live into, that's
Hmm.
not just the like rapey creep guy
Yeah.
profile, then they had like how are they gonna become that
Yeah.
if we're not respecting them in that space too?
Mm-hmm.
And so it goes both ways. I think
Of
by
course.
respecting that energy that we wield and that power that we wield, then we are respecting them as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then we are in that teaching them how to respect us.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I think so many women have the story that they're not seen by men. And it's like, well, what are we doing to contribute to that? Like, are we seeing them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I met my husband shortly after that whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go back to the Big Island Pele blood initiation. How did you how did you know to do that? Or was it just totally internal, like I need to put my blood on myself?
I mean, so the land that I was on was owned and operated by a woman who had been holding women's space there for like 20 years already at that point. Um, and she's a lesbian, and so a lot of it was just like the women's movement of the 80s and 90s. Um, that era and that energy was in that land already.
Hmm.
And so I think in part I was tapping into an energetic that had fields that had already been established there, even
Hmm.
though I didn't really know what I was doing. But like I said, like I had been doing ritual in the forest since I was 12, like that, like just making it up as I went along. And then I had learned some things with Lone Wolf. That was that dude's name.
Okay.
We did a lot of ceremony and a lot of traditional native ceremony.
Mhm.
Um, and so I had like started to learn some things that way. But there was always, the taboos around menstruation. Those are big in a lot of native communities. And,
Mhm.
um, so I had started to like investigate some of that on my own. And then,
Mhm.
you know, through at Rashani had done a lot of work too with Brook Medicine Eagle, and
Mm,
she had another teacher, Twyla Nitch, and you know, all these really potent women who were bringing forward these, and she was doing a lot of stuff with like goddess traditions,
yeah.
and then also process work, Peter Levine, Byron Katie,
Oh,
um, you know, Arnold Mindell, all of those. I was introduced to all of those teachings at that time as well.
wow.
But the ritual part I did before I sort of went into learning about all those teachings. And it was just something that I knew I needed to do for myself. It was like I'm reclaiming myself.
Mm.
Um, and then and then going really deep into hi. Um, yeah, into okay, what does this look like in practice then? And like what are the stories that I'm operating regularly and holding in my body, and how, you know, how am I somatically moving through my pain, and or not, how am I holding it in different places, all the family of origin stuff. Like, I mean, we were in really deep in
Mm,
that time. It was a daily just like internal investigation with a group of people for
wow.
4 months.
Wow.
um it was a lot.
That's a lot.
It was a lot. And then, you know, being on the Big Island, which is totally a place of instant manifestation. And I didn't have a car, so I was hitchhiking everywhere around the island and having these just like amazing experiences. I would stick my thumb out and meet these people that were, it was like wherever I was at in myself is who would pick me up.
Mm.
And I mean, having like, I remember this one guy picked me up one time. It was like a 15-minute drive. We were going to Na'alehu to the post office, but like we ended up sitting in his car for an hour talking. And he's like, I can't read your mind, but I can, your life hangs off you like a sign, and I can read the sign. And he starts telling me all these things about myself and like who I am in the world, and like he like knew that I was looking for this power. I was seeking my own power, and starts talking to me about like the potency of motherhood and how like that is
Oh.
its own shamanic path and like all this stuff. Like seriously, it was so I had all these kinds of, I told
Wow.
you I have stories.
You do.
Um all of these kinds of wild experiences that really shaped that
Mhm.
journey. And for me, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's like what I said earlier. It's so important to do that in our maidenhood years because those are the years of like really discovering who we are. So then, like, I mean, of course, we're always discovering who we are, but I think laying the foundation of ourself, that's what I've really felt like my 20s have been, is like laying the foundation of who I am in the world. And in my early 20s felt like that was so fluid. And now it starts to feel more solid. And I think that that's because we develop it, and we have to like get out of our comfort zone and like have the courage and have the naivete to discover parts of ourselves. And there was something else I wanted to touch on that you said about well, two things. So first is that you had this experience with this man in Northern California, and
Southern
directly after,
California.
in where?
Southern California.
Southern California. Okay, sorry.
We never
um,
made it to the redwoods. We got stuck
you
in
never made it to
Bakersfield.
the redwoods. So you have this experience with this man, and then directly after that, you go to this very feminine experience. And I kind of want to call that out for the women listening, because I think that that is actually a really common spiritual pattern. And I had it in my own way too, is like when I was like 18 to 20 something, I don't know, 21, 22, I was like really steeped in the yogic tradition, which um, I do still
Sure.
feel really grateful for, but it is like quite a masculine spiritual tradition. And it was after that that I had my big womb healing journey at like age 22. And for me, it was yoni steaming and like releasing people I had slept with. That was like a really deep thing for me, similar to your like fire and putting your blood on you. It was like, this needs to like come out of me so that I can claim myself. And I just think that that's like sort of the initiated path in a way. And then we can come to this place where we do then bridge feminine and masculine, men and women are both beautiful, all of that.
Well, I think it too, like it's about more so than just releasing, it's like acknowledging that we have in our bodies a portal,
Mhm.
that stores information
Yeah.
and that has memory.
Yeah.
And like, because I think most women don't realize that.
Mhm.
And how could you if that you've never been taught that, It's just like the womb is like this burden organ that
Yeah.
you can also just get rid of if you want to, and it's like she is talking all the time. All these cancers, all these cysts, all these endometriosis,
Mm.
all that, like she is talking to us
Yeah.
at length about how we operate in relation to her and in relationship to the world. There's an invitation there to go deeper with it.
Mhm.
And that's not to say, like, I know women who've had hysterectomies, and I know that that is not a decision that most women make lightly.
Yeah.
Um, and I know also the trap of thinking that we have to get things perfect in order for our body to be fully healthy, and that, like, sometimes you are not going to figure it out.
Yeah.
I really just want to presence that too, because I've really struggled with my breastfeeding journey with both of my daughters. And, I had this running story, and I still sometimes wonder, like, I wonder if I had done this differently or that differently, like if it would have gone differently for me. And I'm never going to know. I'm not
Mhm.
having any more babies um, that I know of. I'm not planning on having any more babies. I don't really want to have any. Well, part of me does, but part of me also doesn't, because it's really hard on my body, and it's really hard to have a baby and not be able to feed it. That is a hard thing.
Mm.
And and yeah, like so I could tell the story that, like, if I had it all figured out, like maybe that would work. But
Mhm.
like also maybe not. Maybe some of what I've walked in my life has had an impact
Mm.
enough. Maybe all those chemicals I took when I was a developing teenager had enough of an impact that that's not something that I'm going to be able to do.
Mm.
And, you know, and that's okay. So I just want to, like, for anyone who might be listening who's been on a really tough journey with the womb and with, like, it doesn't always end up perfectly. And it doesn't always end in like amazing healing, like what we think healing is supposed to look like.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know if we had hit record yet or not when you were saying something about, like, you've been having these um experiences that are kind of knocking you on your ass a little bit, that like are not what you thought they were going to be.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes healing looks like that. It doesn't look like what we think healed looks like.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this little bit of a tangent, but it just felt important to say.
No, I agree. And yeah, like one thing that has been so immensely helpful to me that I've been sharing this terminology that has been really resonant for me of just like zooming out, being like, okay, like what actually is the bigger picture here? And like, can I, and of course I have my moments of total despair, and I think that I have space for that too. But when I can zoom out and just find gratitude that like I am in this human experience and I have the opportunity to feel so deeply and have all these different experiences, some very painful and some absolutely joyful. And like, can I just be in the experience without yeah, needing it to be this sort of perfect story.
Yeah, the perfect Disney trail.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's like not a thing. Like, we were sold
No.
that as kids.
Yeah.
It's not, yeah, you can have an amazing life. Life can be beautiful and glorious and rich and full of amazingness and gratitude and health and longevity. Like, yeah, life can be wonderful.
Mhm.
But I don't think anybody has a perfect experience. I haven't met that person anyway. And
No, and I
or they're lying.
right, yeah, or yeah, and I was talking to our friend Sydney Sands, who was on
Oh, yeah.
an episode of this podcast, and yesterday we had like a 2 hour long phone call, and one of the things she was saying is, sometimes I wish I didn't feel things so deeply and I could just be a normie and like go along with things. And she was like, but I've just decided that I'd rather have one gigantic psychological breakdown per year than live every day numb. And I was like, yeah, that's the better way to do it.
You know, I think I have this conversation with my daughter a lot because she has her moments where she's like, oh, why can't we just be normal? And I'm like, what is that anyway? Like,
Yeah.
what is normal? Who is
What is
normal? Who are you talking about when
Yeah.
you, because I do it too.
Oh
I'm like,
yeah.
I've totally had my, I wish I could just be normal. But like, what the
Yeah.
fuck is normal? Who is
Yeah.
a normal person?
I know.
I mean, I've definitely met some people where I'm like, oh wow, you live a very different life than I do.
Hmm.
But like, are they normal? They definitely have issues.
Yeah.
I
Well, yeah,
don't
it's like that idea of like choose your hard, like
Right.
it's hard to live a like different life than the mainstream, but it's also hard to live a life that isn't in alignment with you. So like choose your hard.
Yeah. And like a lot of people in the mainstream are addicts of some sort or
Yeah.
another, addicted to work, addicted to tech, addicted to alcohol.
Hmm.
Like, I mean,
Hmm.
are their lives really their own? I don't
I
know.
know. That's a big thing too, is like if you're not owning your life, like you're finding that like pleasure, that dopamine hit, like you're finding it somewhere else. And like, what is that? Is that serving you? And they're hard questions. Like, I don't blame the people who like, stay in that. I have lots of family members and friends and whatnot who are living that like sort of standard American life. And yeah, yeah, again, choose your hard.
Yeah, I've tried to do that a few times and it's laughable.
Yeah.
It's like totally laughable that that me of all people think that I could like try to blend in.
What
Never.
have you tried?
Oh, I tried doing like dressing more like, I don't know, like regular people and like not wearing, all the patterns. But like I have my hair and that is a dead giveaway right there. And
Hmm.
then and that was just not something I was willing to cut off.
Yeah.
And I would go to like all these business seminars and stuff
Mm.
and like I just got called out left and right. Like it was just so obvious that I was trying to fit into something that I did not belong in and whatsoever.
Mm.
Kind of funny to think about now.
Yeah, it is funny. I have those moments myself, trying to work a corporate job and quitting like 10 months in to be a yoga teacher.
Yeah, I can't see you in corporate somehow, Natalie.
Oh gosh, you should see the pictures. I like had my like little bag, my hair was cut short, I had like my glasses, like so funny to think about now. And when I quit the job, I didn't give much of a notice because when I was done, I was just done. And I remember everyone being like, yeah, that makes sense.
Not surprised.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I do want to go back to tell me about your meeting your husband. You said that happened like shortly after being in Hawaii.
Yeah, I left Big Island because my dad had gotten sick. He was diagnosed with a terminal illness and given 3 years to live.
Wow.
Um, and I was like, I had been doing all this family of origin work and a lot of work on my dad, like my relationship with my dad, which, makes sense with all
Hmm.
the man work I was doing.
Yeah.
Um, and realizing that I was just like trying to play out this thing with authority, and it was just like, why don't I just go back to the source and deal with it directly? Like if I got all these issues from my dad, like why don't I just go
Wow.
work it out with him directly?
Yeah.
He's only got 3 more years. Like let's just
Oof.
face it head on. So I moved back to the Boston area and yeah, I met my husband like 2 months after being there
Mm.
with this man who was like completely respectful and treated me like a goddess.
Ugh.
Like I had never met anybody in the bedroom who treated me with such reverence and respect as he did. It was like, whoa, this is possible? Like I didn't even know this was possible because none of the other men I had ever been with were anything like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
What was the process of like working out stuff with your dad like?
I mean, it's gotten a lot easier since he died.
Mhm.
Um, it's easier to work out your ego shit with someone when they don't have an ego anymore.
I know, I was gonna say that, like, all my loved ones that have passed, it's like, I just have so much, I mean, I always had so much love for them, but it's like, you just see them for who they truly are.
Yeah, I feel like I've come to understand my dad, and so my dad's been dead for 15 years now.
Wow.
It was actually just last week was his 15-year death
Mm,
anniversary. And um I feel like I have so much more compassion for him, and am so much more willing to understand him where I was not willing to understand. I still really needed to be right about certain things,
mhm.
um, which I got from him because my dad was right about everything, uh, all the time. He could never be wrong about anything. Um, but my husband and I were talking about this the other day. It was like my dad was an immigrant and he came over from communist Romania and he came over alone. He left his family. He didn't know if he'd ever be able to go back. He didn't know anybody here in this country. And I was thinking about this process that I've been in my for myself recently, and just how hard it is to feel like you have to be the one to know everything.
Yeah.
He didn't have elders. It was the conversation was in context of just feeling deep, deep gratitude because I had a situation happen yesterday. I was able to reach out to one of my elders about it and talk it through with him. And like, I got off the phone with him and I was like, holy shit, I am so, so grateful that I have
Mhm.
elders, that
Yeah.
I have people who have walked further on the path than I have that I can turn to, not necessarily for like the answer, but I can talk through stuff with them and put it in context with my own life, and I don't have to know everything about everything. And what a relief.
Yeah.
What a huge relief. Because there were a few years there where I felt like I was like supposed to know everything.
Mhm.
But that part of that was like a cult thing that I was part of. And there was this real like, you don't need your elders anymore, but blah, blah,
Okay,
blah.
what's that?
That's a whole, I don't think we need to get into that
Okay.
here. But
All right. We're not gonna.
um, but yeah, it can happen to anyone. A
Yeah.
cult thing can happen to
Well,
anyone.
and I think too, even in our culture, um, there is like a do it all yourself mentality.
For
Like
sure.
yeah, like I just even think about it with like people who have like a big online presence and this idea that like who are their teachers? Like they're just supposed to not have any teachers. And there's this like idea
No.
that if we name our teachers, then somehow we're not as worthy when it's like, what? Like this is how we've been doing it for all the ages, is like having a lineage of
And
who,
it creates such an ego problem.
yeah.
And it is stressful to try to be an influencer who knows everything because nobody knows
Oh
everything
my God.
about anything. Nobody knows everything about anything. There is
Yeah.
not one person on the planet who knows it all about whatever their topic is. No one
Yeah.
does. Can we
Yeah.
stop pretending that we're supposed to?
Yeah.
And can we stop expecting people to? Also, like, I'm sorry, you are valuable even if you don't know everything about the thing that you know a lot about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And having, something that Yolanda said in the Radical Birth Keeper School that has always stuck with me, that I come back to often, is like, I think it was something along the lines of like, you can do anything. And the only thing you have to do is ask the angel of humility to be on your shoulder.
Mm,
And I was like, yeah, that's
mm.
that's really what it is.
Yeah, because when you think you know, that's when you get yourself into trouble,
Yeah.
especially when like any kind of healing, well, especially in birth.
Mm.
Like we are not the ones running that show anyway. We are completely surrendered to a higher power in birth and in death. And like, let's stop pretending that
Yeah.
that's not true because
So
that's
were
when we get in
you,
trouble.
yeah, and I think birth is such a great teacher for, oh my gosh, so many of life's lessons. And you kind of had mentioned, when you gave birth to your daughter, you were studying to be a midwife. What, like, when did you get interested in birth?
When my dad and brother died.
Oh, wow.
So my dad died, and then 3 months later, my brother died too,
Oh my gosh.
of a drug overdose.
Wow.
And it was so incredibly painful and life-changing. And I didn't know what, so death was really like my initiation into the birth world,
Yeah.
because I really wanted to know what happened. Like, where
Mm,
did my brother go? Um, and I had a ton of communication with him. It really, like his death in particular, more so than my dad's, um, made a bridge for me into the other world
hmm.
and opened up kind of like my life's work, if you will, because I really do feel like, I'm a tender of those gates. And I know how to do that. And it's not something that I was taught how to do. It's just something that's like part of my makeup.
Hmm.
Um, I think, we all have roles and gifts in the world, and that's one that I've been given.
Yeah.
Um, and their deaths really made that very apparent to me. And,
Mm.
it was like through my brother's death led me to Sundance. Well, I had already started going to Sundance, but led me into the center. And um yeah, it just taught me a lot. And my it was interesting when my brother died, like my first instinctual urge, well, my first instinctual urge was to wash his body, but when I
Mm.
got home that night, my first instinctual urge after that was to make babies,
Wow.
to grow the family. It wasn't even like I
Yeah.
wanted to have sex. Like I wanted to make babies.
Yeah.
I wanted to grow the family
That makes sense.
because I had just lost half my family.
Yeah. That's a big, major initiation to walk
Huge.
through.
Yeah.
And I don't think, how old were you?
I was, how old was I? 26?
Yeah. I don't think most people get like that up close and personal with death, um, that young.
No.
So what do you feel like, where did your like journey take you? You wanted to understand where your brother went, right? And so like where did you land with that?
Well, um, I've had a lot of communication with my brother. I still have communication with my brother. Um, that I feel like is like a whole, it's like a whole other episode, a whole
Yeah,
other
totally.
conversation. Like where, and I mean, I am definitely in no position to sit and be like, I know what happens when we die.
Hmm.
Because I still have so many questions,
Oh
and
yeah.
I think there's so many layers. But I do know that there is something that remains consistent,
Yeah.
and it really helped teach me about like the essence of a person
Mm,
versus the personality and the ego of a
mm,
person,
yeah.
because the essence of a person doesn't go anywhere.
Hmm.
It is like that's how my brother taught me about that other realm, because that essence was still around. That
Mm,
essence was still communicating with me
mm,
actively. He came to me the night he died, and he was like, I'm free. I made it. I'm free. Like he was ecstatic.
wow.
Life was so hard for him. Being in a human body was so, so hard for him.
Mm,
And he was like, "Whoa, yes, I'm out." And um, yeah, he's come to me in so many dreams, so much communication. I mean, there was a period of time where I thought I was going crazy, because I was, driving, and he was in the passenger seat.
wow.
And I'm having a conversation with my dead brother, and I'm like, okay, I've officially lost my mind. But then I started to meet more and more people who were like, no, this is like a thing.
Yeah, it's happened to me with my grandma before. Same thing in the passenger seat, just right there.
Yeah, it's a little disarming.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like, and you have to, with things like this, it's like you've got to be open to it, and you're like, oh, okay, well, okay, that's happening, and here I am, and yeah, I remember I tried to tell my dad that it was his mom, and I was like, yeah, I talked to grandma today, and he's like, you, you what? I'm like, yeah. He ended up thinking it was sweet, but yeah, for some of us, I know for me, I haven't really had super close initiations with death. All of my grandparents have passed, most of them when I was quite young. The one that hit me the hardest was my grandmother when I was must have been like 24. And that was a hard one for me. But what I have, so I love hearing people's experiences with death because it's something I'm not super comfortable talking about all the time, or like feel like I have a lot to offer on that topic. But I do think that one thing I've learned from, in birth work, from the Radical Birth Keeper School, from the women I know who are experienced in moving through that sort of transition. Well, not them themselves, of course, but like moving through that grief, is that like death isn't wrong, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like understanding that death isn't wrong. Like what you said, your brother felt free.
Yeah. Yeah, we have this like hubris that somehow death is something that we have to conquer and
Yeah.
death is an enemy, right? Like we've really culturally framed death as the ultimate enemy and the
Mm,
ultimate failure,
mm,
right? And when we look at like healing arts and wellness and everything, like death is the ultimate failure.
mm.
If you died from cancer, then you did something wrong.
Yeah.
Or you, like no one's going to tell a person that flat out to their face, but that narrative is running in the alternative health and wellness world. Oh, that person didn't do XYZ, or they,
Uh,
something like,
as if we have any idea.
and as if we have fucking control over it.
Yeah.
Like that, I think that's the ultimate thing. Like, it's not up to us.
Yeah.
Life and death is not up to us. And we have to stop thinking that it is,
Hmm.
because we get really stuck. And I think a lot of the problems in our society stem from this idea that life and death is somehow up to us.
Hmm.
Like, look at the whole medical system is built off of we have the ability to control life and death, all of the
Yeah.
decisions that are made in there.
Yeah.
But we don't. It's not up to us.
Yeah. I'm now really curious about the conception of your daughter on this like opposite side of the coin. Did you like start the conception journey after?
And so it didn't start right away,
Okay.
actually. She wasn't born until like she was born in 2012 and my
Mm.
dad died in 2009.
Okay.
So, um yeah, it took a little bit to get through that. It took I think I had to get through Sundance first. That first year after Lotsie died was I just threw myself into ceremony. I didn't know what else to do with my life. I worked in landscaping. I saved up money so that I could just go to ceremony. And
Mm,
I just did worked gig jobs so I could travel and go to ceremony.
yeah.
And that's where went to the 13 grandmothers gathering. That's how I started my ministry training. And
What
it
is
was
the 13 grandmothers gathering?
the International Council of the Indigenous 13 Grandmothers was um a cohort of Indigenous grandmothers from around the world. That was, I can't remember what year they first came together, 2003 or four, or something like that. Um, and the woman who had the vision to bring them together initially, and it was all like prophesied. There's some really fascinating information there. They kind of like fell apart, but
Oh.
and a number of them have passed on now. But the woman who had the initial vision to bring them all together, her name was Jyoti, and she founded the Center for Sacred Studies, and they have a ministry program. So I ended up going through their 2-year ministry training program that's like rooted in indigenous and earth-based ways of prayer. And it was during so Sana was conceived shortly after I started the ministry. And
Wow.
then she was born the day before my year one retreat.
Wow.
Um, yeah, yeah, and that's a whole other story. And then, Luna was my redemptive free birth many years later. Took me 7 years to feel like I was ready to call in another child after Sana's birth because of how deeply traumatic it was.
Mm.
I really think that, and I think that actually the free birth movement kind of proves this, that if women do not have traumatic births, they're way more likely to have more children.
Mhm. Of course. I mean, it's like this idea that childbirth is, something that we just have to endure. And oh, like, why? I just think about it, how often there is this like anti-reproduction, anti-child rhetoric going on, like the interventions in birth, the idea that birth is so painful, the idea that children are a nuisance, and like everyone's so annoyed when there's kids making noise. And yeah, it's like quite sad, doesn't even begin to describe it. It's like anti-life.
Mhm.
So what was your pregnancy with Senna like?
Um, well, I had a miscarriage at 5.5 weeks, and then I got pregnant again right away.
Oh,
But I
wow.
didn't know that it was a miscarriage until a
Mm,
couple years later. And I didn't fully acknowledge that to
wow.
myself until a couple years later. So I thought that I went 44.5 weeks into my pregnancy
Oh my gosh.
and had to be induced, and it was, a whole thing. But yeah, at the time, like while I was pregnant with her, I was studying midwifery, and I had found a preceptor who was my midwife. I had started attending births with her, and then she ran a midwifery program. And so a couple of my fellow students were studying under her, were like supposed to be the assistants for my birth. And in the last, like we did like 3 days of at-home induction efforts. Um, and then she ended up telling me, like you either have to go to the hospital or fire me and continue on your own, which at that point I had already like given over so much agency and power to her, and it was my first birth and I was scared, and there wasn't like, FBS and everything. Like
Yeah.
I just didn't feel, and we had done so many things interfering, and like I just didn't feel comfortable staying at home by myself. So I went into the hospital, but she didn't end up coming with, and neither the assistants ended up coming with because I was so far post dates, 44.5 weeks, that it became like a political issue, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a disaster. And then I ended up tearing really badly because the midwife on duty at the place like pulled her out of me, and I was like being encouraged to push, like force push when I wasn't having a contraction, and then they pulled her body out and tore me with her shoulder, and
Oh my
got
God.
sewed up by someone who had never seen me, stitched me up too tight. I mean, the whole thing was just a nightmare. It's like
God,
really,
I'm so sorry.
it was really awful. And I've done a lot of healing around it.
Yeah.
Um,
What was
but
that
yeah.
process like for you? Like, after her birth, postpartum, healing from, like, when did you realize, did you always know that that was not right? Or did it like take you some time to be like, that was messed up?
Oh, I knew that that was not right.
Okay.
And I mean, but it was really like, I overnight I lost my dream of a home birth. I
Yeah.
lost my career because there was no way I was now going to train under this person who had
Yeah.
abandoned me and treated me so poorly. And I lost my perineum, like all in all in a afternoon. Um, yeah, it was rough. It was rough. So like
Well, and that's
like
like the definition of trauma, right? Too fast, too much, too
too
much, too
soon.
fast, too
Yeah.
soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I took a long time to work through and work out all those pieces and
Wow.
what was mine and what was just wrong.
Yeah.
I think that's life has given me a lot of opportunities to ask that question to look at those details of, what was my part in this? Because we always have like we're not the victims of our life experiences,
Yeah.
right? There were a number of times in that journey where I could have made different choices. When I
Yeah.
was like 5 months pregnant, had the thought that I should not be working with this woman. She should not be my midwife, but I was scared to fire her as my midwife because she was also my teacher and I
Yeah.
didn't know what was going to happen. And so instead of making the empowered choice to listen to what my intuition was telling me and what my baby was telling me, I stayed with her.
Yeah.
What would I can't know that if I had gone with someone else, because that was in my mind, that was my other choice, was to find another midwife. Like free birth was not an option in my mind that
Yeah.
I had heard about or knew about. Like it wasn't a thing
Yeah.
that I felt like I had access to.
When did you like kind of learn about that?
Free birth.
Yeah, free birth.
Um, I mean, I I had like heard maybe one story of like a random person birthing in a yurt in the middle of New Mexico or something, and
Yeah.
thinking like, wow, that's like super far out. Like, I don't think ever be able to do that. And then when I moved to California, that's when I got introduced to Free Birth Society
Mm,
and met a woman who was 6 months further along. She was 6 months more pregnant than I was.
yeah.
Or I met her before I got pregnant, but she got pregnant. She decided that she wanted a free birth. And I had also like come to the conclusion, I hadn't framed it as free birth, but I was like, the next time I have a baby, I don't want anyone there because
Mm,
I want to know, I don't ever want to have someone in that space that I can be like, it was your fault that this happened.
yeah,
If something's going to go wrong, I want it to be my fault,
totally.
you know?
Yeah. And I do know, but I think that some women might hear that and be like, wait, what?
Well, I know it's such a weird thing to say, but like when you've walked through enough distortion and like had things that were not your choice happen,
Hmm.
it's like I wanted everything to be my choice.
Yeah.
And when you have another person in the space, not everything is necessarily going to be your choice because that other person is having an impact.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a good point that like the energy, especially in the room when a woman is giving birth, it's so, like she just is so sensitive to all of it. And you're right. Like you can't I think that for some of us who are like very growth oriented and have this like spiritual orientation to life, that it's like exciting to think like, oh, what could happen in my birth and like who could I become and what could I embody? But when there's someone else there, like it's not fully realized, it's not fully true.
Yeah, I mean, I think it still can be. I think it just really depends on that person and how
Yeah.
aware they are of the impact that they're having and what they're giving energy to or taking energy away from
Yeah.
in the moment. And I've also been the person to sabotage someone else's birth. So I didn't want anyone else like, you know, because that's how I was trained.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
trained to sabotage people's births.
Well, yeah, that's like what the whole medical
Midwife,
midwifery
yeah,
thing is. Yeah.
yeah, it's fucked up.
Yeah. It's crazy. So what was this redemptive birth like for you? Like what do you want to share about that?
Um, I mean, there was a lot about it that was awesome. And even like I did end up transferring to the hospital and I can look at like I ended up transferring for the placenta. So like the
Mhm.
birth was amazing and there was a lot of things that happened that I'm so grateful that there was no one there for because um I would have transferred earlier and I probably would have had a cesarean and I would have had someone messing with my baby trying to resuscitate her and
Yeah.
there's like a lot of things that would have been considered like emergencies that we navigated just fine. And then, you know, I was still not completely 100% walking in my trust of my body's ability to do this on her own. And so my husband and I had bought shepherd's purse and cotton root bark tincture to
Mm-hmm.
have on hand in case. And my husband and I had talked about this. Um, and I hadn't said like I want this for sure. We had just
Yeah.
talked about like having it on hand in case. And then I think my husband had some anxieties and he um put the two tinctures together in a cup and handed it to me shortly after the birth, shortly after she started to breathe again, or
Yeah.
for the first time. And we were like settled in. And I remember like putting my hand on the cup and feeling like a sink in the pit of my stomach, like a sinking feeling.
Mm.
And when I look back on that moment now, like in the moment, it was a moment, right? These things
Yeah.
happen in such a quick flash of a moment.
Yeah.
And when you look backwards, you can expand time and you can really like look at all the pieces that occurred. And I think that the shepherd's purse by itself would have been fine. I think it was the cotton root bark that was too strong for me.
Yeah.
And so instead of saying, no, I don't want this, when I felt that, I was like, oh, my husband was so kind, like and caring, bringing this to
Right.
me. And so I took it. Um, and I think that caused some issues of my uterus contracting too strong. I was not able, like every movement that I made basically would initiate this like really, really painful um contraction that would make me, it would like kick me on my back. So I kept trying to get into a good position to deliver the placenta and I couldn't. I was in so much pain. It was worse than the birth.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, 4 hours of this and I had bled out so much. I still hadn't passed the placenta. I was passing placenta-sized blood clots.
Yeah.
And then somehow I ended up getting to the end of the bed. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor and my hearing went away.
Oh no.
Um, and that's when I looked at my husband. I was like, my hearing went away. I think we should call the EMTs.
Yeah.
And he was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's like not a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that got to be my choice to call the EMTs. Although in that state, I thought that the EMTs would be able to take I didn't occur to me that they would take me to the hospital. I was like, they're
Yeah.
gonna come and they're gonna help me get in the bathtub or like get me to to the toilet so that I can get the placenta out, or they'll be able to pull the
Right.
placenta out. Like it'll be great. And they don't pull the placenta out. They're not allowed to do that. They're not trained to do that. So then I have these like giant dudes in my room. I'm like I'm like naked on the floor covered in blood. The room looks like a murder scene. And you know, I'm like, great. I just need you to get this placenta out of me. Like, sorry, ma'am, we're not able to do that. I'm like, what fucking good are you then? Why are you here? I want you here if you can't do that, if you can't help me with this.
Yeah.
Um, and then at some point in the kerfuffle, they had taken my blood pressure, and the one guy, he said, ma'am, your blood pressure is 60 over 40 and your lips are turning blue. We need to take you to the hospital. And
Mm.
I was like, ooh, 60 over 40 is a really low blood pressure.
Yeah.
Like that's probably that was where my midwifery brain was like,
That's not great.
okay, that's not good. I guess I will let you take me. But I was fierce mama bear the whole time. I did not let them take Luna away from me. She stayed in my arms that whole time.
Mm.
It was, you know, it was traumatic for Sana to see all that happening. And then it was like right before COVID. And so they had already made the ER, like I didn't even go to the ER. They took me straight to labor and delivery because the ER was being sort of cordoned off and no one under 16 could be there. And
Oh wow.
so Daniel and Sana followed the ambulance and went to the ER where they thought I was. And So that was like a whole thing that was really hard for her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but even
Yeah.
there, like they wanted to give me Pitocin. I refused. They actually listened to me. They wanted to stitch me up. I refused. They actually listened to me. Um, and so there was even like the hospital visit itself, there was something really redemptive about that for me because I got to say no and be heard,
Yeah.
um, which was very different from my previous experience, especially with the Pitocin.
Yeah.
Um, and like once the placenta was out, I was like, all right, like we did it. I really still felt like even though I needed that help at the end and it didn't go how I had envisioned or how I necessarily wanted it to, like we did it.
Yeah.
We did it.
And like getting to recognize, like I heard you say, like you made the choices. And so even if it was like the choice to take this tincture or the choice to go to the hospital, they were your conscious
And
choices.
there's so much learning for me in that. It's not
Yeah.
like I can look back on that story and be like, it's my husband's fault.
Yeah.
Like what a lesson for me. That one split second moment of having a sinking feeling in my stomach and doing it anyway. The result was. And can I know that that wouldn't have happened anyway, even if I hadn't taken the tinctures? No, I can't know that. But I can know that it had an impact. I mean, I know myself, I know my body, and I know plants.
Yeah.
And there was a plant action taking place inside my body
Yeah.
that was contributing to that situation.
Mm. So what was this postpartum like?
Well, Luna was born 12 days before lockdown.
Gosh.
So it was horrible. I mean, there were a lot of things about it that were actually really lovely. I had a postpartum doula. She was
Mhm.
great. And she still came even with lockdown. She
That's
still
great.
came and did, but like, the meal train that I had set up became like Grubhub cards and
Mm. Not as nice.
um no, and just like the general global fear and confusion that was all of a sudden happening was
Yeah.
immense. And for the first 40 days, it was great because you want to be in that little cocoon with your baby anyway.
Yeah.
But like my mother-in-law flew out right away after Luna was born, but then she left early and my mom was supposed to come right after her. My mom didn't end up coming because the flights were grounded and
Wow.
um so I didn't have the postpartum I thought I would have. So we ended up like getting evicted from our apartment. I mean, the whole thing was just ridiculous. Yeah. And so this year, actually, so Luna's 4.5 now, and I am taking this year, we're homeschooling, and I feel like I'm actually in a way kind of redoing some of that time with her because
Mm.
life was so wild and crazy that in her first year of life, we moved so many times. And I mean, I think it is this way when you have a second child, you can't really give them the same attention that you gave to the first. And I think that's probably more true the more children you have. I only have two, so I can't speak beyond that. But
Mhm.
yeah, I'm really trying to give her, and she's asking for, and I'm listening to her desire for that presence and that time with me because I feel like she didn't really get me the same way that she would have um, if the world hadn't gone totally insane right
I know.
after she was born.
I really feel for the children that were born in 2020. Like, what a challenging year to be born in.
I mean, yeah.
Just like developmentally and socially. And yeah.
And I
Yeah.
had my own, physical recovery to deal with. Like I lost a ton of blood. My skin was yellow for a month. And I think actually I'm still dealing with the implications of losing that much blood. And how, especially because I'm kind of in that like perimenopausal window where things are starting to change and shift, and I can feel my hormones
Mm-hmm.
changing.
Mm.
And I just did I'm working with two women who were doing like a panel. We did this really great panel call on the relationship. They're two Ayurvedic practitioners, and in Ayurveda, there's three windows in a woman's life that are called the Kaya Kalpas, the sacred windows. There's
Mhm.
menarche, there's postpartum, and there's menopause. And
Yeah.
the understanding in Ayurveda is that all of those, like what happens at menarche is going to impact postpartum, and what happens postpartum is going to impact menopause.
Mhm.
And so really taking care of those time periods becomes very, very important. And
Mhm.
while in many ways I took really good care of myself after Luna was born, I still lost a ton of blood.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of walking in that like both space right now, where there's ways that I'm like healthier than I've ever been. And there's ways that I'm really struggling, and my body's trying to like accommodate different things that, I mean, I can't know, wouldn't be happening if I hadn't lost all that blood, but I have a sense that that
Mhm.
blood loss is contributing, because I had to build all that back up, and that takes a lot of reserve. And so again, I didn't make enough milk, and you know, and then getting donor milk during COVID, that was interesting.
Oh, that must have been a whole event in and of itself.
You know, life is full of events.
Yes, I had a podcast episode actually, as we're recording this today. It was released today on the October 23rd, with a friend of mine, Emily. She was like, like I didn't ask for it. I didn't think I wanted this initiation, but here I am having it. And that's really like what it
Yeah.
is. Didn't ask for, it, didn't know it was coming. Didn't necessarily maybe want it, but that's what's there. And yeah, I love your like willingness to like be in the human experience of it and also like see the lessons of everything you've been through, because that's the real juice there, to be able to be in both. Um
I mean, why else go through it?
yeah.
Seriously, if I'm gonna come to Earth, I might as well mind the shit out of the experience.
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, I feel that lately. I'm curious, yeah, like to you've kind of brought me to the present of being in this like pre-menopausal kind of time.
I know I struggle with perimenopause as like a
Yeah.
thing on its own.
I know some people, yeah, are weird about that term, but I'm just curious, like, are there ways that, yeah, just tell me a little bit more about your experience right now. Are there ways that you feel like you're preparing for that shift? You kind of talked a little bit at the beginning, but
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been on my mind. I don't think that I'm close to menopause. I mean,
yeah,
they say perimenopause can last like 15 years.
yeah,
Um, what I'm aware of is that things are changing,
yeah.
but like things on the planet are changing too. So like, is it, I know there's been a shift. I know I'm 41. I'm, but there's like, it's like things are changing in my whole life, not just in my body, in my orientation to life, in my clarity of what I want, of like what I have, and my levels of satis, like so much is under review right now for
Yeah.
me in my life. And it's great. Um, it kind of feels like everything is up for study and
Wow.
investigation, and like, is this really what I want?
Yeah.
And I get to be really, really clear
Mm.
with that inquiry. And and yeah, I'm, doing all the things to take care of my body. And my body has been going through some weird things lately. So I've been,
Mm.
dealing with some of that and communicating. And as always, my body has always been this great uh transformer. I don't know what to call it. Like I have a friend who, she does not move things through her body the way I do. Right.
Mm.
She and I work very differently in that way. And
Yeah.
she's the one who, because I used to be like, oh, everyone just like processes everything through their body. And she's like, no, that's not
Yeah.
actually true. That's how you work. She's like, I don't work that way. And she, her process is in a very different space. But like I've always been someone who like I move a lot of energy through my body.
Mm,
And when there's something in my life that needs to shift or change, my body lets me know and lets me know loud. And so that's like some of what I'm navigating with right now and dealing with, and like all of the little places where I'm maybe not um meeting myself the way that I want to be, or meeting life the way that I want to be. And yeah, it's so I'm in that study right now, which is it's a
wow.
different study than it's been before. And my energy levels aren't the same. And it's been interesting to talk to some older women too, who can speak to that time period, who like I was just recently, it was so helpful to hear this woman talk about that time before menopause and how she just did not have the same level of energy that she used to,
Mm,
and how different that was, and how like there's such a tendency to want to pathologize that or make it wrong somehow. And really like that's just part of that stage of life. Part of this stage
yeah.
of life is there's a slowing down.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's the same in like our menstrual cycles every month in the like luteal phase. It's like sometimes we
sure.
pathologize so much as PMS, but it's actually just the natural flow of our cycle.
Right. Yeah, and really like getting okay with the autumn and like knowing that winter is coming.
Yeah.
But also there's all these colors. Like look at the, it's amazing.
I know that I think of that with, I love making these comparisons between, the luteal phase, the season of autumn, the sorceress phase of life, all of this. And it's like when you think about autumn, like people think of it as like falling leaves or whatever, but it's like also this time of harvest. Like there's so much goodness for us
Mhm.
at that time in our cycle and in that time of our life. It's like, wow, look at what I have accomplished in either this cycle or this lifetime. And like really finding gratitude and celebration for yourself in that.
Yeah, and I do think, my probably the biggest challenge that I've been having in this time is, I've sort of briefly referenced it, but I was basically in, it wasn't a formalized cult, but it was um cult-ish
Mm,
business experience for 7 years, where all of the work that I did during that time period I don't own. Um, and so this phase, where it's supposed to be this harvest time, I'm finding myself actually like having to plant a new garden on a certain
mm,
level, putting myself out there in a not totally different way, but a different way, in a new way, through a new platform. So like that's been my, and that's my own personal, that's unique to my journey. That's not, most women in this phase of life
mm-hmm.
would not be going through that. And I could absolutely see how how much richer, I don't want to say richer because it's very rich already.
Yeah.
Um, but how different it would be if I was like standing on top of something that I had already been building for a long time. Whereas like I'm having to build from scratch, like my house burned down basically.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I'm rebuilding,
Mm.
and I'm rebuilding with the knowledge of how to build a house that I didn't have the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's a
it's different.
different, yeah, it's a different experience. And you're right. Like, not like I'm sure it's just as rich. It's just like your unique experience. And isn't that like what we've been talking about these past couple hours is like we just never know what we need and what our path is going to be. And Gosh, Tatiana, you and I could keep going on and on, but
Mm.
I'm going to ask you the last question I always ask all the women on the show, which is if there's a piece of womb wisdom you'd like to leave the women listening, what might that be?
Hmm. I I don't know that it's mine to give. I think that it like your womb is the one that has the wisdom for you, not someone else's.
Yeah. Mm, I love that answer because it's so true. It's like, yeah, I think when I first started my womb healing journey, as I like to call it, it was always about the womb, right? Like it was like the womb, the idea of the womb. But then it's like, well, what about my actual womb? And then, yeah, everything changes. Thanks for
Mhm.
that. Well, I would love for you to share where women can find you and share about your book and whatever other offerings come to mind.
Yeah, so the book is called Path to Puberty, the Ultimate Resource Guide for Mothers of Daughters. And you can find it at pathtopuberty.com. Um, and I am offering a 6-month container, Mothering as a Spiritual Path, for women who are really wanting to mine the evolutionary journey of motherhood, to really get on that train and not view motherhood as this horrible scourge, but
Mm,
how do we really get the most out of it and do that generational healing work that we talked about earlier with
yeah.
our kids, with our daughters especially.
I love that. Such beautiful offerings.
Mm.
Well, Tatiana, thank you so much for being here. It's been so fun and so deep and yeah, just really wonderful to get to drop in with you today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and for highlighting women's stories this way.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the wisdom of the womb today. It's truly an honor to bring these stories forward, and it would mean so much to me if you'd rate and review this podcast so that it can reach even more women. If you're looking for deeper support, you can find the link to book a one-on-one virtual session in the show notes. See you next week.